You have to
Yeah.
treat people on an individual level.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
how many times do we need to learn this lesson over history?
I know. Yes, you do. So actually, so you said you were interested in Peter Singer. So can I start off, but talking about dehumanization with a story about something that happened really a long time ago when I was close to the start of my career.
Please.
I was teaching in the philosophy department at Bristol University, and I had a friend who was doing a PhD in psychology on the experiences of people with sort of mild learning disabilities about their experience, their subjective experiences. And she was round about place having a cup of tea, and she went to the loo, and she didn't come back, and she didn't come back. She didn't come back. I thought maybe she's been taken ill. What, is it? How long? Eventually, she came back into the sitting room, clutching a copy of the Journal of Applied Philosophy that I'd left in the bathroom, shaking it and trembling with rage, because she'd found it open at a philosophical article. I forget the author now, but a philosophical article looking at the question of marginal personhood. So this notion of what it is to be a person, this philosophical idea, which is expressed slightly differently, but roughly to be a person, you have to have an idea of yourself as a continuing being with desires for the future. You have to be rational. You have to be able to have a certain level of cognitive capacity and to be able to recognize other persons and so on and so forth. And so the question then would be that some human beings who didn't have those capacities, like infants or people, maybe people with dementia or people who had very low cognitive capacities, would be marginal persons. She was shaking with rage. And so what came out of that, we wrote a couple of papers out of those discussions, because one of the things that really came out of that was that it was as if personhood was a kind of like a test that you had to apply. You've got this theoretical test and you apply it to a human being or something and say, oh, passed, failed. You're not actually a person. So therefore, the question is, how do we treat you? But coming from psychology, coming from a different discipline, the assumption would be, there's a person, how do I approach the person to communicate with them, to find what their preferences are, to sort of make their life better, to relate to them as a person? So the assumption is that there's a person there, and then you do what you can to relate on their particular level. So it's like what you might call a more phenomenological approach versus just like this theoretical totalizing system. Because as soon as you have this totalizing system, then you get all these peculiar results where things drop out. Actually, around about the same time, I was teaching a course in practical ethics. I was co-teaching it with the head of department, Adam Morton. And one of the books that the students were reading was a book by Peter Singer and Helga Kuser called Should the Baby Live? And the students told us, we hadn't realized we'd done this, because we realized in front of a class, we were co-teaching it, the students told us that we would accidentally call the book by the joke name that we would give it amongst ourselves. We used to call it Kill the Baby, because that was always the answer. That was always the answer that they gave.
Yeah. And see, here's the thing, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I don't care. I believe deeply in the scientific method, deeply. And you're a trained scientist. I'm not a trained scientist, but I believe in the method. But I see that it has its limits, because the simple fact is we're having a discussion, and a rational discussion, about what's a human being. And it's like, really? We're kind of doing that. But that's logical when you're a materialist. And if you can't accept a degree of faith, an underlying assumption, is like, I look at you and go, you're a bonobo, but you are a human. Even someone who's got Down syndrome, who probably has a lower IQ, And here's where Singer's arguments, I kind of get it. It's like, well, someone with Downs may have a lower IQ than a bonobo or some other, really higher order primate. Therefore, using these metrics, the higher order primate is a human, but the human being suffering Down syndrome isn't. That's nuts.
Yeah. I just think it's incredibly dangerous when you try to have cut off.
Yeah, of course. But this is what happens unless you realize unless you recognize that materialism as a philosophy has its ends. It's like it can take you this far. It can take you this far, but it can no further. And there's this brilliant debate between, not debate, this discussion between Ben Shapiro and that, that magnificent African-American physicist whose name escapes me. It's just come out. I was watching it today, where they kind of like go in, where they were kind of discussing, and they were discussing the trans issue. And Shapiro was kind of saying, look, you're a scientist. Can you come out and tell us that this is not scientific? And mate, he was so good. He started talking about phenomenology, and he said, these things are manifesting. We kind of like we've kind of got to discuss it. And he got angry. I'm trying to find out this guy's name so I can actually kind of mention it. But he got angry with Shapiro and said, why are you asking this question and where is it going? And to me, that was a beautiful moment because it was an absolute, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, right, yes.
Oh my God, he's so brilliant. I'm such a fanboy. And he's a vehement atheist. But he kept on saying to Shapiro, where are you going with this? Why are you asking those questions? There is no better way of articulating that reason must be a handmaiden of faith. And there are some things that we just need to take. We just got to say, you know what? Someone with Down syndrome is a human and a bonobo isn't. That's, Peter, I get your arguments, beautifully written book. And once you look at his precepts, because there's nothing worse than being sucked in. Well, actually, I'm going to articulate it a different way. There's nothing better in a perverse way than reading a beautiful, brilliantly articulated book from someone whose mind, and Singer's mind's brilliant. Like he's brilliant. And once you get, okay, these are your precepts and you're going to take them here. And you get good along, you go, yes. And there's no way you can say no, except at the precept level. That's the only place you can say no. You can't get back here and unroll it. You got to start the precepts. You got to start, you know what? No. And by the way, your method, the method you're applying to this is the wrong method. You should not be applying. And I don't mean in a moral sense. I just mean like you've just got the wrong tool for that job. This is actually a philosophical question. It's not a scientific material question.
Yeah, and specifically in relation to those notions of personhood, if you examine them, they're set up in ways which are biased towards certain ways of living your life. So, funnily enough, these philosophers who write about personhood, they're biased towards thinking that having a really rational approach to life.
Oh, funny that. If you haven't read Plato, you're not really human, unless you've read and understand. Unless you're a Wittgenstein man, you got to be a Wittgenstein man. You're not there. It's like
not quite as bad as that, but almost